70 weeks is 490 years. 70 times 7, and those weeks are years in the context of what Daniel is teaching. That's the way the Hebrew expresses it. They can have sevens of days, they can have sevens of years. 7 was a very important number to them. In many ways, their 7 was like our 10. 10, 20, they thought in terms of 7. So 490 years are decreed on your people and your holy city. And so this whole prophecy then involves the Jewish people and Jerusalem, so that it centers in that part of the world. Now, we live in kind of a nice era of time, considering in the last 2,000 years, there was no Israel till 1948. And actually, a little bit later than that, when the Palestinians and Israelis were allowed to live together, when England finally let the Jews move into Israel, then at that point, the Palestinians tried to drive them out. There was a war. Israel won. And at that point, they called themselves Israel and have been Israel ever since. So we live in a time when there is an Israel. This makes sense to us. In prior days, when there was no Israel, people tried to work around this prophecy, come up with other explanations, because after all, there's no Israel. Well, God knew what he was talking about. So those 70 weeks on the holy people, the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and then we read that there's a group of things going to happen during that 490 years. Finished transgression, put an end to sin, and so on. And so we went through that the last time. There are certain things that were going to take place during that 490 years. And we saw in our last session on this that some of these referred to the kingdom and 2 were already finished. So these, let's put that in different color, these are finished. They're done. Christ has died for sins of Israel and the rest of the world, and Jesus completed the work of atonement for sin. But by the end of this, when the kingdom of Christ comes, Israel won't be transgressing against God. There will be a beginning of an eternal righteous reign of Christ. Prophecy will all have been completed by then, and there will be a holy place anointed where? In Jerusalem, because that's what the subject is. So moving on from then into verse 25, we're given the time frame for this 490 years beginning here. So Daniel writes, Daniel's given the information and writes this, know and understand that from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, so that's the beginning then of this series of events for Israel. The decree to restore and rebuild, what we know when that took place, that was King Artaxerxes, the Persian king, on March 5th, 444 BC. So we can date that particular beginning. And then that goes on until the anointed one, the ruler, comes. The word ruler in many translations is translated prince. It's the same word. You could translate it either way. Anointed one can also be translated Messiah, because that's what Christos in the Greek and Messiah, when we translate from the Hebrew, that's its basic meaning, is the anointed one. So the anointed one will come. So from the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the anointed one, we're given 2 time periods. 7 sevens, and 7 sevens is 49 years, 7 times 7, and 62 sevens, or 434 years. Now that gives us 483 years when we add those up. It's 7 years short of the 490. And we're going to see in a second why that is. And so we've got a beginning, we've got an end to this first segment of 483 years. And then we're told it will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. It can only refer to Jerusalem because that was what's being talked about in this particular verse. And so during that period of time, Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Now that story, especially rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, is in Nehemiah. And if you read Nehemiah, it's a fascinating book, not a long book, but it tells the struggles from the time Nehemiah was allowed to return to Jerusalem to begin to rebuild their city until most of it is rebuilt. It is a time of great trouble. The surrounding nations did not want a new Israel. They did not want Judah to rebuild. Sounds very familiar today. Things have not changed at all. And so they fought them, but the Medo-Persians, who allowed the rebuilding of Jerusalem, they were very good people. Those Persian people weren't so bad back in those days, as they have come to be over the century. They put down their foot and said Israel can rebuild their city. And so then, going on to verse 26, after the 62 sevens, so that's this period of time, 434 years, the anointed one will be cut off and have nothing. And so what happened at that point, the anointed one was, quote, cut off. Cut off in the Hebrew language is used of executing a death penalty on a criminal. And so the anointed one was executed as a criminal. And so we see that happens after the 434 years. Now, what are those years after that 434? It's the church age. It's the interim period that we are in right now. That it's not during that last 7 years, as we're going to see, because we know that following the death of Christ was the onset of the church age, beginning on day of Pentecost, still continuing on today. And so we're in that interim period after the anointed one, after Messiah, has his life taken for sin, of course, that we know. And then, in the next phrase, the people of the ruler who will come, and we'll talk about who that ruler will come in a second, they will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. And so we know that took place already in AD 70. That's when Rome, because of Israel's rebellion, Rome came in, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and so on in 70 AD. And then we're told that war will continue. War for where? Israel. See, the whole situation here centers around God's plan for his people. And so war will continue to the end after Messiah dies. Well, that's certainly continuing on. Much more today than in the time prior to 1948. Prior to the time that there was Israel, there were wars there in Jerusalem. The time of the Crusades, the Muslims coming in, taking the city, the Crusades from Europe going in, trying to drive them out. Lots of wars took place. But we see even more wars today that specifically involve Israel. And we read that desolations are continued. And so they're decreed. It suggests to me that Jerusalem might even end up being worse off than they are now before the end comes. Because you wouldn't call it desolation today. It's under tremendous pressure, but desolations on Jerusalem are decreed. Now, I want to go back for just a second. I hate reviews, but if we don't do this, then we can't put the whole book together. If you remember, there was a statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, mixed iron and clay, and a rock at the end that destroyed the whole statue. It referred to the various sequence of nations up until the end. So we had the Babylonian Medo-Persian. They were all represented by animals, Greece and Rome. But the prophecy concerning Rome had kind of an intermittent change to a certain point. And we know that after the rapture of the church will be removed. That 70th week, the last 7 years, will take place. And in the previous passages, we met the 10 horns that seemed to come out of the Roman Empire, but were also separate from it. And then also we met the little horn who came out of the 10 horns, who became a very vile, a very angry man who would then begin to conquer all sorts of places, especially Israel. And then that always ends with the second coming of Christ and God's kingdom. So all of the passages we looked at prophetically always end with God's kingdom. And so then, let's go on to 9:26 a little more. After the 62 sevens, the anointing will be cut off, you have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city. Now, these people destroy the city. But there's a ruler who will come who isn't of that group, as we're going to see in a second. And so the people will destroy the city. That was the Roman Empire. Some have postulated this ruler will be a future ruler of the Roman Empire. But there's no way to be certain about where he comes from. We might say, well, yeah, but there's not going to be a Roman Empire. But we have to recognize that the Western civilization is based on the history of Rome. When Rome ended, especially Western Europe and including the United States are part of Western civilization. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so what about this ruler who will come? What about him? Well, okay, we know the next event is the church age. That's all, we've already seen that. And we know there's 7 years left in the prophecy that haven't happened. And so what's going to happen during that period of time then? Because we know that the total here is 490 years. And so there's still 7 years left of the 483. And so that's what we're going to be considering. What happens during those 7 years? How do we know what's going to happen during those 7 years? Well, that's in a sense where we begin this morning with the next verse. Daniel 9:27 says, He will confirm a covenant for many, with many, for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. At the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. And so it has to do with a covenant, and it has to do with a he. Now we know in the context of Daniel 9:26 and 27, the ruler who will come is he, because that's the next antecedent person after the mention of the ruler who will come. He, the ruler who will come, not the people that will destroy Jerusalem, which has already happened, but a ruler who will one day come. Now, that means that he, in Daniel 9:27, is a ruler who will come. Someone is going to come and sign a treaty, covenant in Old English, or the way we use it, could also be translated treaty. I don't know why the modern translation can't use English and call it a treaty, but they call it a covenant, same sort of thing. But the ruler who will come, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7, one period of 7 years. So there will be a 7-year treaty which will be signed by a coming ruler and with many. Now, many who? Many Jewish people, or we would call it Israel, because this whole passage is about the Jewish people and Jerusalem. And so he will sign a treaty with many for 7 years. Now, that ruler which in our next lesson we'll talk a little bit more about. We call him the Antichrist today. He's the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians. He's the beast of Revelation 13, and so on. So that's the ruler. He's described elsewhere as well. And this 7-year treaty is also known as the 70th week of Daniel. And that's what the 70th week will be. So this ruler will come. He'll make a treaty with Israel to bring, obviously, peace. So they first, in this outline we're doing on the last 7 years, a treaty will be signed. Now, we've all learned over the years, historically, that treaties may or may not be worth the paper that they're printed on, and that sort of thing going on today. But the treaty will be signed. And then, going on in 927, in the middle of the 7, he, that coming ruler, will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And I tried to depict here, is that coming through okay? If we had those lights off, it'd be better, but it'll be okay. But in the middle of the 7, he'll put an end to sacrifice and offering. And in this illustration, he tries to illustrate that the temple will be desecrated in Israel, which means that during this last 7 years, Israel has a temple. That's something we could talk about. Certainly there's evidence for that in Revelation and so on. But this picture tries to depict the desecration of the temple, the empty altar, the various things in the temple itself laying around, the temple door open, and you see Jerusalem in the background in smoke. That's a picture that looks so familiar today in Israel and other places. So, that's the middle of the 7 then. The treaty is broken by the coming ruler after 3.5 years, halfway through the 7-year treaty. And then, going on in 27, and on a wing of the temple, he'll set up an abomination that causes desolation. Now, we don't know what that is. A lot of commentators think of that as maybe a statue of the world ruler being worshipped in the Jewish temple. That's how we depicted it here. But the main thing is that abomination of desolation takes place then when the treaty is broken by the coming ruler. And then we know then until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Who him, the ruler, he will be gone, he'll be destroyed, and that's the end of this period of time. Now, that is the end of Daniel chapter 9. We don't have more information, except that Christ filled the blanks in Matthew 24 and 25. And so I want to just finish up this morning looking at Matthew 24 and 25, because Jesus outlines now what Daniel has already presented. And so in Matthew 24, we read that Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. It was indeed a beautiful place, as far as we can tell. And from the ruins that are left, makes it very clear how attractive it was. It was up on this Temple Mount. The temple itself sat in that Temple Mount. It was done by Herod the Great, who was a great builder. And Jesus answered them and said, you see all these things, don't you? Truly I say to you, there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. If you go to Israel today, you see proof of that. That happened in AD 70, one pile of stones after another. Some has been rebuilt, but not the temple. Now, where the temple stood in those days, now stands the Muslim shrine, the Dome of the Rock. Also up on that Temple Mount today, in one corner of it, is a Jewish or a Muslim mosque, rather. So Jesus, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came saying, well, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? Because they knew that was the final event when he comes again to establish his kingdom. What's going to be? When's going to be the end of the age? So Jesus gave some fill-in there for what we now know to be the next 2,000 years. We don't know how much longer, but at least what's gone on. Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Doesn't matter what goes on in this world, all the things that take place, all the, we tried to define, look at global tensions rise again, conflict escalates and so on. The wars and rumors of wars have been out there for 2,000 years and still are very real today. But he says, don't think that's the end. Jesus said, it's not. And he said then that all these things are but the beginning of birth pains. He said nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, earthquakes in various places. He compared it to birth pains because, once the pains of birth begin, there's going to be a baby at the end. There's no turning back. Can't go back and change your mind. And Jesus said those things are just the beginning of what's going to come in the end. He says in verse 9, they'll deliver you up to tribulation. Now he was speaking to the disciples. When he says you, I think he meant them, the very beginning, the very nidus of the church age. They'll deliver you, the church, up to tribulation and put you to death. It's only the last 7 years that centers primarily on Israel and their final destruction. But they will deliver you to tribulation, put you to death. You'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. There's so much hatred out there today for Christianity. A lot of it's kind of kept underground a little bit, but nonetheless we see it always rising to the surface. Many will fall away, betray one another, hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And those have risen. There have been many false prophets over the years who will come to mankind and be promising all things, sort of things. Like I have a special message from God. I'll give you signs, wonders, blessings, wealth, and success. Those things are all promised. And he says that because lawlessness will be increased, this tries to picture the idea of materialism and so on, and the love of many will grow cold. And certainly we've seen in many parts, especially parts of Europe, that almost could be called post-Christian. The idea of a biblical approach has almost fallen by the wayside. We prefer evolution to creation, etc., etc. And then in Matthew 24, Jesus says, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. Now that word saved could also be translated delivered, because in the end, believers will be delivered. This picture tries to give the idea that it's kind of an uphill slog that's going on under persecution. And this gospel, he said, of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as testimony to all nations. Then the end will come. What's the end? The kingdom age. So during the church age and during the tribulation, the message of the kingdom of Christ will be presented. Primarily in the church age, we present the message of salvation by faith. During the tribulation, the main message will be the kingdom of heaven is at hand. You better believe, because it could happen any time. So he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, that's how we know it hasn't happened yet. When you see that spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, and he says, let the reader understand, figure it out. You know it's going to be a bad time. And so that abomination of desolation took place, or will take place rather, when the treaty is broken by the coming ruler. And he said, when that happens, he said, when you see that abomination, desolation in the Jewish temple, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who's on the housetop not go down and take what is in his house. Just get out of there. And let the one who is in the field, don't go back to pick up coats. Just take off for the hills. And alas, for women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight won't be in winter, tough time to travel. It gets very cold in parts of Israel in the winter, or on a Sabbath when it's hard to travel. For then, he says, will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world, not even till now. And so that's why we call this last 7 years, that time when the abomination of desolation takes place at the 3.5 mark of the 7-year treaty. That's why we call this the Great Tribulation, because Jesus gave us that phrase. He said if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. In the middle, I tried to kind of give the idea of the horrible weapons. The earth could decimate itself, could wipe itself out, unless God put an end to it before the earth destroyed itself. So he said, look, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, there he is, don't believe it. For false prophets and false Christs will arise, perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray if possible, which is not, even the elect. So Jesus says, don't believe it. Well, how do we know if someone comes along and says that they're the Messiah? How are we going to know that he's definitely not? Because, see, he said, I have told you beforehand. Look, he said, they'll want you to go out and look at the hills. They'll want you to come to the inner rooms, look for him, watch for him. Well, we don't need to do that. We don't need to be looking for anything, because Jesus says in the next verse, as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. We'll know when Christ comes. Everyone will know. It will be clear as a bell. You don't have, if someone says, this guy over here must be the Christ, he's not. Because we would know, especially as believers, if he was. And that's why he compares the coming of Christ then at the end of this last 7 years of the book of Daniel is when Jesus comes again. He says right after the tribulation. So that puts the timing here by Christ. You see how he's amplifying this verse in Daniel. After the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. The moon won't give its light. Maybe clouds in the skies, whatever. And the stars will fall from heaven, meteor showers. The powers of the heavens, he said, will be shaken. And then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. The whole world will see this. We'll know it. Don't have to worry about false things. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call. They will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Believers will be called from one end of heaven to the other. That could include resurrection believers as well as those alive. And when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, which we know will be in Israel. And so let me just finish by putting that into the context then of a little outline. We know we're in the church age today. That happened after the death of Christ. So we're right in sequence. And we recognize that the church age will continue until the rapture takes place. And this picture tries to depict those of us who are alive and remain to be at the coming of the Lord will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. And then will come this treaty of 7 years. There will be a period of peace for 3.5 years, and then the great tribulation after the treaty is broken by the coming ruler will take place. At that point, then, will be the second coming. That's when Christ comes. It's obvious to everybody. There's no question about it. And he will sit on his throne. He will reign in his kingdom for 1,000 years. And that 1,000 years will then continue on to the New Jerusalem with the destruction of the present heavens and earth on into eternity. And so that's why you see this passage in Daniel 9:24-27 is so important, because it so outlines for us what Jesus amplifies. I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to cover one more little thing. What about believers who survive the tribulation, who aren't killed during the tribulation? Jesus said before him, we're talking about Jesus, will be gathered all the nations. He will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates his sheep from goats. He will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." So that the believers who are alive at the end of the tribulation, at the second coming, will enter the kingdom as living humans. Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the fire prepared for the devil and his angels." And those who go away into eternal punishment are those on his left, those goats, so to speak, but the righteous will go into eternal life. So at the second coming, that's when the separation of sheep and goats takes place. Living believers will go to populate the kingdom. Unbelievers will be sent to eternal punishment. What about believers who have been killed during the tribulation period? Well, in Revelation 20, we read, "I witnessed the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony of Jesus and the word of God, those who had not worshipped the beast or his image," that's the tribulation, "and had not received its mark on their foreheads or hands. Those souls came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years." So the tribulation will be a terrible time for believers, but look at the promise that they have. This is the promise that Jesus gives already to those who were believers during the tribulation. Regardless of what they suffered, they will come to life and reign with Christ on earth for 1,000 years. I'm really over time. Let's close in prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we're thankful this morning, Lord, for what you've given to us in your word, how it helps us to understand what's going on even in our world today. And we recognize, Lord, that we are patiently waiting for you and the rapture of the church, when we will be called up to meet you in the air. Or should we die, we will be resurrected in our resurrection bodies to be with you at that same time. We're thankful we can count on all these promises, and we just ask that all these things might affect our thinking in our daily walk, for we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. See you next week.